Hi there. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome to How to Optimize Your Zoom Experience. I am Beth Lawrence, and I will be your host for today. So the first thing I wanted to do is to get to know a little bit more about you. It looks like we have one that has joined on time. So Sarah, please tell me your name, your company name, and what brought you here today, if you have an event or program that you're looking to plan.
Yeah, my name is Sarah Salvatoriello. I work for Ampersand and Ampersand, and I used to do a lot of work in experiential before the pandemic, and now I'm still kind of living in pandemic mode. And so knowing that Zoom has become sort of this like necessary evil. I'm always trying to figure out ways to make that experience of gathering still meaningful and helpful to people, knowing that this is going to be something that we're going to have to really embrace.
Awesome. I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining. I appreciate it. And obviously, if there's any questions, please stop me. I'm more than happy to make this a dialogue. I have a few slides and then that kind of go over the overarching strategy behind optimizing your Zoom. And then I have a couple of different things we can do. I wanted to show you the Eventbrite integration on the back end. And I also wanted to show you all of the Zoom settings that are available. But I can also just answer individual questions strategy-wise about what you're doing, if that's helpful for you too. All
Cool.
right.
And if you want to you're recording this. So if you want to practice a spiel, I'm also fine to join from my phone and I don't know, rally and test stuff out if that's helpful too.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
you got it.
Yeah, so I guess we'll just get started. There was a couple other people who registered, but some registered for the replay. So I'm just going to get started. All right. So a little bit about me, for those who don't know, I am a certified meeting professional. That's what the CMP after my name stands for. It is a designation that was earned by the Convention Industry Council. So I earned that in 2015. And the intention behind that is really to give a standard to any professional in the meeting industry. So whether you're a vendor, which at the time I worked actually for a caterer, whether you're a true planner, whether you're an event tech person, it really just gives all of us the same language that we're able to speak with one another. I have been in the hospitality industry for over 20 years, which is crazy to say. And then I've been in events, true events, for over 15. I am lucky enough to have had some virtual event experience beginning in 2018. So beginning of 2018. So I'm very, very well versed in virtual events. And I'm also the director of programs and events for Philly Startup Leaders, which is an organization. It's a nonprofit in Philadelphia. We do accelerator programs and incubators, as well as live conferences and events. Our accelerators are fully virtual. So that has given me a lot more knowledge in the Zoom realm. So today I'm going to give you a perspective from 3 points of view on Zoom. The first will be the attendee, which obviously you are today, then the speaker, and then I'll go into the planner point of view. So first things first, one thing, let me see, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. So the one thing that a lot of people don't even realize is that if you click these three dots on the corner of your own box, you can actually, if you're unable to see for some reason the microphone and the camera, you're able to mute your audio and stop your video here. You're also able to really quick blur your background, choose a virtual background filter, and then you can also pin people to your screen. So you can pin yourself, meaning that everyone, for me, I will be pinned on the top of the gallery. And if I, as the host, were to spotlight myself, then I would be spotlit for everyone as the speaker. And then you can also hide your self view, which I highly recommend if you're in a lot of one-on-one Zoom meetings. Otherwise, you wind up looking at yourself. We all have done it, and we all have seen people that the whole time they're looking at themselves versus looking at you or looking at the camera. So those are some quick hacks here. And then if you go into where you see your start and stop video, that little arrow right there, you can open up your full video settings, and you can do the same thing next to the microphone for your audio settings. So there you can not only select your camera, you can select whether you want to mirror your video or you want it to be just as is. A lot of folks have a preference, so that's off mirror my video and this is on. I happen to like this side of myself better, so I always mirror my video. You can also toggle it to be an HD camera, which is great for recording. And then my favorite thing is you can touch up your appearance a bit on Zoom. If you're like me and you don't like to wear makeup every day or have to worry about it, it's a great tool. I would recommend not toggling it too much because, as you can see, it's a little bit blurry, a little bit Real Housewives. I like to do it a little bit closest to the left. You can also adjust for low light. There's a ton of settings in here, and a lot of attendees don't know that you can do this while you're in the meeting. So I just wanted to point that out. All right. So now that we've gone through that. So that's a way to optimize your experience. Another thing that you can do is you can hide the non-video participants, which I love doing, because then if you see a number of just black boxes with names, or you see, you can actually hide profile pictures too in your own settings, which is great because, let's face it, profile pictures can be extremely annoying to just stare at the whole time. So that's it for today for the attendee experience. Obviously, it varies versus webinar versus meeting. Today, we're in a Zoom meeting, so there's a lot more freedom from an attendee perspective. Now, I, as the host, before you came in, I can actually do a number of things to make or break your attendee experience, right? I can select whether you have reactions available to you. So if you see the reactions tab, the reactions button on the bottom, you'll actually see that you have the ability to use multiple emojis, and I've actually enabled what they call nonverbal responses. So if I am talking too fast, which I tend to do, you're actually able to request either speeding up, slowing down. You can actually put a coffee cup if you're going to get a cup of coffee. So that's good to know if you're in a meeting, especially with a number of stakeholders for a long duration of time. Just put that little coffee cup up, and then it just lets them know that you took a break. So from a speaker perspective, let me see. Yep, from a speaker perspective. So the first thing is your host should manage your expectations. So what that means is I should know as a speaker before I sign on whether I'm doing a workshop or a keynote, because that's two totally different things, not only two different settings in Zoom, but two different ways to prepare, right? If I know that I'm going to have to be interacting with people and sort of facilitating, it's a lot different than a one-dimensional speaking engagement. Also, they should obviously tell you how long the session will be, ballpark, time speaking, meaning true speaking versus Q&A. And they should also tell you if there's breakout rooms. If you are expected to facilitate a breakout room or facilitate a discussion, it takes a different type of energy and a different type of preparation. So as a speaker, I would encourage you to reach out to the person who invited you to speak at the meeting. Even if it's an informal meeting, knowing these details is really going to help you prepare and really prepare the chunk of time in your day that you need to devote, not only the day of, but to preparing for it. For speaking, assessing and prepping your stage is super important. So for a desk or a chair, for example, I like sitting down when I speak. A lot of people like standing up. So prepare your area, whether you have a standing desk and you're going to be, standing and speaking. Some people even conduct meetings on, treadmill desks. That's more power to them. I cannot have all of those distractions. Also note, I have a swivel chair. If you've seen my Instagram, you have seen me talk about this a lot. Make sure that if you swivel, if you have a tendency to swivel and you have a swivel or a rocking chair, you lock it, or at least you lock your feet on the ground. A lot of us, when we get nervous, tend to move back and forth, tend to, play with our hair, which is why I have my hair up. All of those things take into consideration before you speak on Zoom. It's unlike speaking in person where the focus is completely on you and the little box of your screen that's around you. There's not an entire ballroom with things going on and other people to look at. So lighting is also extremely important. Natural light is best. In my office, I actually have a window right in front of me, so it's optimal. I'm very lucky for these Zoom meetings and recordings. If you don't, I recommend getting a ring light. I actually have a ring light. It kind of looks like, if you're familiar with Real Monsters, it looks like the monster that holds its eyes. It has two ring lights that you can actually bend to make sure that it configures so it's not reflecting in any places that it shouldn't, and it holds your phone as well. So it makes it really easy for me to go live on Instagram, for example, and also conduct a meeting such as this. Checking your background. I actually did this morning, even though I'm in this office every day. I try to pepper in some interesting items behind me. That one painting, if you can see it, I actually did myself. So it can become a conversation piece. It's a paint by number, but it's still something that's really fun and gets a conversation started with people. Even if you plan to have a blurred background or a virtual background, this is super important. A lot of people don't think about things going wrong. And I have the luxury as an event planner of thinking about everything that could go wrong and preparing people for it. So try to make sure that your background is as clean as possible and as interesting as possible, even if you don't plan to show it, because you never know what could happen. You could wind up, showing something on a screen that you didn't plan to. Next is camera and microphone considerations. So know the location of your camera and recognize the indicator light. I have a MacBook. It's very easy to see where my camera is and the green indicator light. They actually started to sell small devices that you can attach to the top of your computer that tells you when your camera is on and when your microphone is on or off. That would be extremely helpful for me as a speaker, because if I'm unsure where my indicator light is, unsure of what's going on, it makes me a lot less confident. So if you're interested in that, let me know and I can send you the link and information for it afterwards. Another trick you'll notice, even when we're in gallery mode, I look at the camera while I'm speaking, making sure that it's eye level or above. This is super important because it actually makes you stand up straighter. I notice a lot of folks on Zoom, well-meaning people like myself who really want to connect, we tend to lean in, right? We tend to lean in and hunch over while we're looking down at the screen and talking to one another. If you are speaking, it's a lot easier to just look straight ahead, and it also looks better in the recording. So you get more of a recording that is intimate versus looking at people who are not going to be watching the replay. For microphone options, there are so many different options. Obviously, I'm not wearing a headset or AirPods right now. It's because I'm in a very small space by myself, on a floor by myself. So I know that there will be minimal background noise. You've seen people speak with AirPods, with headphones, or a podcast setup. Pro tip, if the host of the event doesn't invite you to a tech test, you should ask for one. But if they don't have time for it, you should have seen the button to test your audio and video while you're in the waiting room. A lot of people don't even notice that because it's very quick, but it's something that can troubleshoot if you are joining, especially if you're joining an event a little bit late. All right, so the last thing, what are you wearing? Speakers tend to, in virtual settings, in my opinion, tend to forget, clashing with the background behind them. They tend to forget what colors look good on them on camera. And they also tend to forget the functionality of what they're wearing. And what I mean by that is, I mentioned earlier, I have my hair up because I tend to, as you can see, talk with my hands. I tend to play with my hair when it's down and my hair is very long. So it can be extremely distracting for folks who are watching me speak if I'm constantly doing the share, a clueless hair flip. They're not really going to be paying as much attention to what I'm saying. Do you always with accessories, but consider where your microphone is and what is coming into contact with the attendees, or what is affecting the attendees' experience. And what I mean by that is, I've seen a lot of folks have AirPods or earbuds, AirPods, for example, with really beautiful earrings that actually jingle. And the whole time I was distracted by them knocking on the AirPod microphone, and they probably didn't even know it, right? They heard it in their own ears, but they just thought it was dinging in their own ears, but it really affected my ability to even pay attention to what they were saying. Similarly, if you have the earbuds with the microphone here, I've seen a lot of people who especially wear really pins or large necklaces, statement necklaces, just microphone knocking on it the whole time that they're speaking. So those are small things that you can do to really make sure that the attendees are focused on you and not focused on any distracting accessories or anything going on behind you. Any questions so far from an attendee perspective or a speaker perspective? Okay, cool. So now we're talking about from a planning perspective. This is obviously where I shine. The first thing that I think people forget about is setting a goal or an objective for the meeting. What is the intention of the meeting? Whether this is, Sarah, I'll use you as an example, Sarah and I meeting one-on-one. What is the intention of that meeting? What do we want people to get out of it? And also considering what type of event you want to have based on the intention and the goals. Do you want to have a more interactive event where people can have their voice heard and anyone can raise their hand and be a collaborative part of the conversation? Do you want to have more of an intimate interview where maybe you as the host interview one speaker and there's, attendees that are taking in the experience but aren't necessarily able to unmute, interrupt, or become an integral part of the actual program? Those are some small considerations as far as what type of event you want to have. This is really critical, the who and the how many. I actually capped this event at 25 people today because I find that 25 people in a Zoom meeting, especially if I am running it in gallery mode where I'm looking at everyone and it's a very interactive workshop style, can be extremely difficult. I used to run virtual co-working events and I would wind up having 25 people and thinking that I would be able to get everyone to make a 30-second introduction. And by the time we did that, for all intents and purposes, the meeting's over. So you really have to decide how much time you want each attendee to spend on camera as well, because that really will lend itself to how many people can attend. And then who do you intend to join? Do you want it to be solopreneurs? Do you want it to be enterprise technology salespeople? You have to really get granular. And, I know many of you are in marketing, branding, and understand the personas, but in events, it's extremely critical to really think intentionally about who you want in the room, because you're creating an experience not only for yourself and for the attendees as a collective, but each individual attendee. So you want to make sure that each individual attendee gets something out of it. Also consider the timeline of the event and the team that you have behind you. I can't tell you how many people have reached out to me, hey, I want to have a Zoom conference in 6 weeks. Okay, well, that's great. 6 weeks could be a long time if you already have a huge Rolodex of speakers, or 6 weeks could be, not enough time to even do the research to get the speakers that you need. So that's definitely a consideration and something that I think is lost on folks. Also consider the team that you have to help you. Do you have people who can, run the actual back end of the Zoom while you are speaking? If not, that is going to lend itself to a much different event experience than if you have someone that can manage the chat and make sure that the waiting room is not full. Small things like that can really add up to a big event experience. Also consider with your goals and objectives, what are your milestones along the way? Do you want to, for example, have 15 people signed up by July 1st? Or do you want to have 10 highly qualified leads, signed up, and that's really your goal? Really thinking about the milestones and setting smart goals it's helpful in every facet of business, and events are no different. Think about finally what you want your attendees to take away from the event. So many people are just excited to get folks in a room that they don't think about, well, the purpose of this event is taking time out of someone else's day to either teach them something, make a connection, have some fun, let loose. Like, what is the intention of your event, and how do you want your attendees to leave feeling, and what do you want them to take away? So, as a planner, I touched on this earlier, you definitely need to manage expectations with all of your key stakeholders. So you have to have a communication strategy. There's so many different people that are involved in an event, even a virtual one. Your attendees are one facet of that. Your speakers are another. You know, if you're lucky enough to have partners and sponsors that want to either speak or help facilitate or offer something to your attendees, they need to be kept in the loop as far as what's going on. I actually am developing templates for communication strategy for events, because I find that speakers especially need a cadence of communication beyond just one email saying, you know, here's the date and time and a calendar invitation. You need to think about being able to train them on technology, if there's any additional technology, or if they're not super familiar with Zoom. You have to consider even creating, you know, a landing page for the speakers, something where you can provide updates to them all as a whole, especially if you have, you know, 10 or 12 or 15 speakers. It's a lot easier to make updates in one place, central area that speakers can find it, versus all individual communication and emails, because that takes a lot of time. Long-term engagement strategy. So what is this event for in terms of the bigger picture? Is this part of an annual program? If so, how do you keep your attendees engaged, you know, either week over week, month over month, however often, whatever cadence you meet? How do you keep them engaged in between, whether that's an online community, an in-person community, even, you know, a social media community, Facebook groups, Google groups, many different ways to consider keeping them engaged. And then if it's part of your sales funnel, how does that work? What should they have viewed before? What should they view after? And how can you get them to continue purchasing from you, interacting with you, and being a part of your community? Because that's really what events are all about at the end of the day. So now we're getting into, in Zoom, do you want a meeting versus a webinar? I actually didn't know the capabilities of Zoom webinar until end of 2020-ish. I did a fundraiser for a nonprofit completely on Zoom webinar, and I was really amazed at the functionality. And of course, since then, there's a lot more that has been developed. So quick and easy, meeting is just what you think of. If you have a Zoom meeting, it's usually a meeting with your boss, meeting with 2 or 3 people, very easy, self-guided, interactive. You want all of the members, usually all of the members on the meeting, including speakers and panelists, to be able to speak, to have their voice heard, to unmute themselves, or to at least for you as the host to be able to unmute them. It's really more of a laid back experience. Now, Zoom webinars are different, where each keynote speaker or panelist will get their own login. They actually have their own login link, and it's sent to their email, so that when they click and log in, everything is set in terms of their name. The computer actually automatically recognizes them as a speaker, and they are therefore the only people that are able to be on camera. Very, very different than a Zoom meeting. You can turn attendees into panelists if you want them, for example, to come off of chat or Q&A and ask a question on camera, but it requires a lot more on the back end when it comes to staffing, when it comes to volunteers, and actually there are also Zoom practice sessions when it comes to webinars as well. But a great thing about it is they have the option for custom branding. I really like that, because obviously if you're going to do a webinar as part of a sales funnel, you would love it to have your branding on it. But you have to decide what works best for you and what audience you're looking to engage. So the types of sessions, panel discussions are usually 3 to 4 people plus a moderator. I always recommend having panel discussions be about 45 minutes of actual content, 15 to 30 minutes of Q&A. Keynotes, you see them any length from 30 minutes up to 60 minutes and even above. Especially on virtual, I recommend keynotes no longer than 60 minutes. It can be very draining to watch the same person speak. Workshops, again, that will then lend itself to a meeting that's more interactive, and then a fireside chat. In that instance, I would actually recommend you doing a webinar, because then you're only spotlighting those 2 speakers. This is a big consideration, whether to live stream or not. So you may be aware just by your interactions on Zoom, I could live stream on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook. There are a ton of custom streaming services. In fact, there's one right in Philadelphia called Switchboard Live, who they actually allow you to live stream across any platform. There's a lot of considerations for that. Whether you have tested that before, I highly recommend you testing it with something small, maybe a little tidbit for your audience. And then do you have a virtual assistant / Zoom co-host? Again, if you're live streaming, that's a whole other thing that has to be monitored. It's very difficult to MC, as I'm doing, speak, and also facilitate Zoom by yourself. So if you don't have a Zoom co-host, if you have not tested it before, I don't recommend live streaming. That takes a lot more preparation. Registrations. So a lot of you are probably wanting to at least collect some information from your attendees prior to their arrival. The difference with Zoom and virtual events versus in real life is there's not really any door ticket. It can be very lonely if you have a door ticket just waiting in a Zoom, waiting for people to come. So you definitely want to have pre-registrations. There's a couple of different ways to do it actually in Zoom versus on Eventbrite, and I will be showing you the back end of each. So you can actually have guests register on Zoom directly. You've probably seen this before where you've been either sent a calendar invitation or a link that says, register here. Then on the back end, you can actually, as the host, just go into the meeting settings and see who is registered, how many people, their email addresses, et cetera, and you can collect information from them. This is actually relatively new, at least to me, but Zoom with PayPal allows you to charge for webinars in Zoom, which is huge because then you don't have to do the Eventbrite integration. If you're someone like me that has an Eventbrite account anyway, it's really not that big of a deal, but it's always nice to keep everything in one area if you possibly can. So that's a consideration. So now I will pause there before I show you the Eventbrite integration and the back end of the Zoom settings. Are there any questions?
This may not be a question for right now, but with the having a co-host and facilitating wearing multiple hats and being in different roles, do you have a workflow or a best practice around you presenting right now? If you were to have a VA, what are some of the good things to own versus things to delegate? Obviously there's a variability between preference, but I feel like that is sometimes a tough obstacle for me and a tough obstacle to kind of talk clients through. So I'm curious what you have found in your experience as a good practice for that.
That's a really good question. And I think obviously it depends on how comfortable you are with Zoom. I am so comfortable that I don't necessarily need, a facilitator. Although if I was doing a large webinar or large gathering, I definitely would need one. I like to give the co-host the permissions to do the breakout rooms for me, especially if there's a workshop component. They can actually do the recordings, they can do the polls and the quizzes for you. I had set up some polls and quizzes. It depends on your settings on the back end. So if they're a part of your organization, you can have them go in and redo this. You can have them load the breakout rooms ahead of time. You can have them, I like to have them monitor the wait room and message people in the waiting room. They can also provide more information and context. So if let's say I reference my ring light, I would love to have had, a link ready and someone just send it right in the chat. Same thing with files and different things that you reference. It really is just the difference between having a more seamless experience and a more like you've seen me probably at some point be like, okay, 1 second, I'm just going to do this, And then I would always recommend having practice sessions with them. In Zoom meeting, it's really easy to have practice sessions. When you schedule a Zoom webinar, you can click on a setting that allows you to have a practice. I always recommend that because then until you push live, it doesn't go live. If you don't do that, it's just going to go live whenever you scheduled it to. So that's always a good thing too, because they can kind of be in a webinar scenario. I would actually ask them to monitor the Q&A as well. So Q&A in webinar is a bit different than chat. There's a couple of different columns that you have to manage. And then also the correspondence with any speakers who may either not be on camera, they may be running late. It's just a lot easier to have someone in the back end troubleshooting versus me talking to 3 speakers, but 6 of them aren't here. And then I'm having to, wear all those hats. Does that make
Thank
sense?
you. Yeah, makes total sense. Thank you.
Do you have any specific questions about your event in terms of, or program that you're thinking about in terms of strategy before we move on?
I mean, I'm working on one for a client in a couple weeks, and we're looking to do it as like a test drive because she's been doing in real life sessions. She's a mental health professional, like had been doing in-person therapy as much as she could. And
Yeah.
so she's really anxious about doing it virtually. And
Mhm.
so we've been trying to liken the real life experiences with the digital experience. And so
Yeah.
some of the things, like you're going to have a team behind you, like you're going to have someone that can be in there to be helping you.
Mhm.
I think is what we're trying to coach her through right now.
Right.
Um, yeah, I feel like that's kind of where my head's been lately.
Awesome. And also, having a person monitoring email is always huge because
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
that's certainly something that I've always had, because every week when I do the facilitations for PSL, there's inevitably someone, even though the link is the same every week, there's inevitably someone who's like, I can't get in, my this and this and that, I'm going to be 5 minutes late. And having that fail safe for someone to at least check is always good, because then again, you don't have to be the frantic, worried
Mhm.
planner and also the host at the same time, because
That
that's
makes total sense.
my
Yeah.
eyes always show my franticness. So
I love that.
people are like, Beth, are you all right? And I'm like, well, I will be. It'll be fine. So, all right, I'm going to share my screen. I would love to, let me just make sure that I have the right thing up before we do that. See, could have had a facilitator. All right. So I want to show you how to link the back end of Eventbrite. Again, Eventbrite it's not a necessary evil. You don't need it. I really like Eventbrite because it has its own marketing components. It actually even has its own email marketing now. So you'll see if you go back into your managed events, go into your drafts. Obviously, if it's published, you can go into the published, but Zoom tutorial. So automatically, if you select an online event, it's going to open up this kind of third option, is usually 4 here. It'll open this third option, online event page. And that's really what we're going to look at today. So really easy. It kind of explains it here, but they'll join the event right through the virtual venue. You can actually embed your Zoom video. You can share content. This is where they're going to direct your ticket holders. There is a caveat with this. I have had it happen before where I planned an event, entered all the Zoom information, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Everything was connected, and people were saying that the Eventbrite link wasn't working. They couldn't figure out how to get through. I was on the session running it, and people were saying, I can't get in. I was inviting them. And by the time I actually got everyone in the meeting, we were 15 minutes in and we had to reschedule. So there is a fail safe. So what you do is you hit add Zoom. Obviously, if you have multiple Zoom accounts created, you can add other accounts. I have mine already set up in here. So Zoom users means anyone on with your domain. So in my case, at bethlawrence.co, if I had, assistant at bethlawrence.co as a Zoom user, then they would come up on there too. And essentially, if they logged in, they would see this meeting. Or if I logged in, I would see this meeting. That's what selecting the user means. So you want to make sure that whoever you select here is going to be the one that's actually signing in and running the meeting. So here it's asking you again, are you hosting a meeting or a webinar? It tells you what it's ideal for, which we already went over. In this case, I wanted to just do a webinar for me, let's say. So then it'll say, okay, do you want to create a new webinar? Meaning it'll take all of this data from Eventbrite and create a new webinar for you, or do you want to select existing? So if you've already created the Zoom, you can just select an existing event and then it'll do that for you. So once you complete, ta-da! So it becomes a Zoom module. And that way your attendees will be able to click on it right from here. It'll also give you the meeting ID. It doesn't give you a password. Note that. So you can also edit it. You can put a description here. you can say allow attendees to join before start time. I don't necessarily recommend 30 minutes before. That's a really long time. And if you've ever gotten one of those panicked emails of someone's in your Zoom room, I recommend doing 10 to 15. Let's see, 10. So then you can restrict access to certain tickets, which is also really great. So if you only had certain folks that you wanted to be able to join, then you can create different ticket prices and give people the different ticket links. So you will apply. There's also a space to add a thumbnail. What I usually do is essentially just take the same thing that I used for the Eventbrite image. It's going to be a little bit different, crop it. And then you can preview the attendee event page here. It's going to take forever, probably. Great, it's going to take forever. So that's not working right now, but usually you can preview the attend. Go ahead, Sarah.
So this is fascinating. So when you, for this event specifically that we're in right now, you had sent an email that was like, if Eventbrite gets hinky, here is the link.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. That Zoom login or the like Zoom meeting room or webinar or whatever was different, I believe, than what is on the event page.
Okay.
So if you click on the event page, it would say that you're already in a meeting.
Interesting.
Because it's like your personal meeting room.
Okay.
But I guess I'm just trying to figure out like how, if it makes a meeting or you link it to an existing meeting, how does Zoom and Eventbrite reconcile it so that you don't have like two rooms for the same meeting?
Right. So let me see if I can do this too. So what I usually do now, because I've kind of been burned by Eventbrite in the past, is I go into the meeting. So let me see, of course it didn't do it yet. Let me see. That's why it's in webinars. So I go in now to the webinar and I see that, okay, it's done this, it's created this test event, but I don't necessarily want it to be called the same thing as the Eventbrite. So then I just always go in and I do my own back end setting, what have you, in Zoom. And it's going to automatically take those changes, at least it should, and apply it to
That's awesome.
The event. So
okay.
Yeah, and you can actually even change stuff in here as far as the date and time. And pro tip, even if the date and time is wrong, like in Zoom, if you hit start, it's going to start whenever you start it. So even if it's like, oh God, it should have been the 16th or something, like that's fine. This duration also doesn't matter. It's just going to basically prep the calendar for you with the duration, but it's not going to like sign off or anything like that, unless you have one of the settings or accounts that it's 45 minutes and then it shuts off. This is actually really important. This sometimes is a firewall or a reason, in my opinion, why Eventbrite doesn't work. Because if you have this registration required here, they're already registering on Eventbrite. What it's supposed to do is transfer that over to Zoom. I have found that doesn't work very well. So I usually click this off. And then authentication just means that they have a Zoom account. I normally don't do this. This is a lot for security reasons. So you may actually look into this with your client, especially if they're in healthcare. This is also tricky. So what happened is, because of my settings, because of my overall settings in Zoom, I must have said, hey, in every webinar, require a password. This right here does not show you a password. So that is actually what happened to me the time that I didn't remember to do it. So what I started to do now is really go through, I make sure that the host video is able to be on. If you hit off, the panelist or the host won't be able to turn off. In webinars, it's not the same. They're not going to be able to do things on their own. So you have to make sure that these settings are correct. For webinars, again, you can enable the practice session. I always recommend doing that. You can enable all these different controls down here. This is kind of cool that a host can set wallpaper and control, assign virtual backgrounds, name tags. that works if you have a virtual background that's branded and you want all of your speakers to have the same background. I think that's a little weird for me, but it's obviously depending on what you want to do. This is really cool. You can make the webinar on demand. So what that means is you can record it in the cloud, and then you can have the settings in there to where either people have to register for it, or they can just, you can set it where it's like 30 days, people can watch it on demand. And then
does that sync, like if someone were to access the Eventbrite ticket or like go to the information about the event, would the on-demand viewing after the event be an Eventbrite, or do you have to like
I don't think so.
communicate with them?
I
Okay.
think so with Eventbrite, and we may not get into the full background of Zoom settings today, but in Eventbrite, you can actually do, you can schedule the attendee emails. What I always do is first of all, I toggle the passcode off, all of this stuff. So, I'm just going to say that I put the description in here, and then this alternative hosting is kind of cool. Again, this just means if I had an assistant at bethlawrence.co, that assistant could pick up and host this event if for some reason I can't. So it'll be visible in their webinars. If I didn't do this, any other person in my account wouldn't even be able to host it unless they signed into my personal Beth at bethlawrence.co account. So once you save this, you can see all the different settings that you put in there. Also, you can see the size of it. My account allows 500 attendees. You can also edit from here. There's emails that you can customize your invitation email to your panelists. So again, in webinars, you have panelists versus attendees, which they call like participants. So a panelist is the one that has their own login. They are the only ones that Zoom cares about whether they're on camera or not. You can make a panelist an attendee and an attendee a panelist, but for all intents and purposes, Zoom only cares about the panelists. So you can have customize all these settings about whether you want the invitation, whether you want the confirmation email sent to registrants. I always think you should, because if you don't, then people will lose all the information. So these are all the different little things that you can do. Reminder emails, follow-up emails. You can also design your branding here. So you can do a title, banner, logo, all that stuff. This would be great actually for your client. You can do all kinds of things to customize. Here, you can create your polls and quizzes ahead of time, which I highly recommend. It's a lot easier because then you just hit polls, quizzes, and deploy. And then you can do a post-program survey. You can actually connect a third party if you want. This has the Q&A settings, and then there's more individual settings if you want. So what I like to do to make sure that I have the information correct, and that even if the thing in Eventbrite is wrong, people always tend to check their emails. So I try to create a Google Calendar invitation. And then especially for the speakers, but even for the attendees, depending on your comfort level and your relationship so far with your attendees, I like to send a calendar invitation to them, because Eventbrite sends it, but sometimes, again, the information's incorrect or people have neglected to opt into that setting. Make sure that they can't invite others or see guest lists, obviously, but then you at least have the information here. And then what I do is I copy it, and then I go into manage attendees, emails to attendees. I want to do this. There we go. Now it's finally doing it. So then it goes for you to create tickets, which I'm not going to right now, but then I don't know why. I guess it won't let me because there's no attendees right now, but I'll show you in the other one. So if you go into emails to attendees, it should have 2 to 3 emails that Eventbrite automatically populates into your events to kind of give people the information that they need. It's very, very, very bare bones. So there's a couple of different ways that you can kind of customize. emails to attendees and order options are the two sections that I would look at. The order options, you can customize an order form and an order confirmation, which is great because then you can make sure that all of the Zoom information is in there as well. And again, this is just a fail safe. Hopefully the information on Eventbrite will be correct, but if it's not, then at least they have a backup. And then you can customize this here. Obviously, you know how to do that, so I won't dumb this down for you, but here is that. And then you can actually pick out, okay, so when do I want that to be sent to my attendees? Here you go. I want it to be sent. You can send it now. You can send it at a specific time or a date and time, or you can send it, 3 hours before the event, 10 minutes before the event, what have you. And then you'll see there's emails scheduled and emails sent. That's how you edit and check what you've done so far. So we have about 10 minutes left. I did have it in my agenda to show you the back end settings of Zoom. If you would like, I can still show it to you now and kind of go through everything quickly as far as like things that people don't really know about Zoom, or because we're running over, I would be more than happy to create like a Loom video and a tutorial of kind of the different ways to optimize this section and send it to you afterwards, which would be best for you.
I mean, I'm fine to go over.
Okay.
If that works for you. I don't want to like give you homework because I'm asking questions.
Okay, well, we'll go through them. So perfect. So you can see this Zoom background, right? This screen with all the settings.
Yes.
Okay, great. So this toggle, basically this happened because Zoom in 2020, sorry, there are wasps trying to get at my orchids through the window. In 2020, I don't know if you heard, Zoom had a lot of pranksters and also people that were just bored at home. Basically, people were just hopping on to Zoom because people were, hosts were just putting their meeting IDs and their passwords out there and people were taking advantage of it. So for example, I was in one very intimate networking group and a person came on, someone was chasing them down the stairs and they were screaming. It was a child, but we had no idea what was going on. They came in and out as fast as they could. But that is why this universal option exists for security. So that means that all meetings either have a waiting room option, an authentication option, meaning they have to have a Zoom account, or if you don't enable this, all of your meetings automatically will have a waiting room. I don't think that's a terrible thing. You can't change a setting now, but there are different ways that you can say, okay, I want a meeting room, I want authenticated users, I want both. So I'll show you that. So waiting rooms, again, toggling this on and off, you experience this today. That is very good if you don't want people hopping in on your meeting. If you have, a meeting at 12:30, a meeting at 1 o'clock, a meeting at 1:30, if you don't have a waiting room, you're using, for example, your personal meeting room account or the same meeting ID, then people can just hop in to your meeting whenever you would like. I don't ever like that happening. So that's why I always enable the waiting room. But of course, you can also within the actual event, when you're in it, you can change that setting too. But this is something that you can change on the back end. And this changes this is the kind of the catch-all settings for your entire account. So you can also edit options and customize the waiting room. You can say, okay, I want everyone to go in the waiting room, anyone who I don't recognize to go in the waiting room. And you can also have the order of people in the waiting room. So I like to do it by join order. A lot of people like to do it by alphabetical, especially if they have a lot of people. That's really good to know. Again, if you have like 50 people and you have to look for someone to like spotlight or do something, I would move it to alphabetical as opposed to join order. Join order is great if you want to see, okay, this person joined first. Like for example, with programming, I like to see, did someone join at 6:30 when the event ends at 7, or did they join at 5:30? But I also know the same exact 10 people are going to come each week, so it's a little bit easier. I don't know if you've seen this option. You probably can do it too if you go to participants, or there is a section for attendees to hit invite, and you can invite someone to a meeting while it's going on. In that case, there's a setting where you can bypass the waiting room. You can also, this happened to me and gave me a heart attack. I completely lost connection. My Zoom shut off during a meeting. Thankfully, I had a co-host, so it went right to the co-host and no one was the wiser. But this setting is great because then if you're the only host and you don't have a co-host option and you drop off and your attendees don't know each other, you don't want to leave it up to your attendees to figure out what to do and how to move on. So if you move them back to the waiting room, it's a little bit easier to facilitate. You could still lose them, but it's a little bit better. Again, you can customize your waiting room. You've all seen the waiting room screen, but you can customize your title. You can even put a logo and a description in your waiting room. I honestly haven't even done this with some of my settings, even though I've done it with a lot of my client settings. So again, here's options for passcodes. This sets a passcode for your personal meeting ID. Again, I always recommend this because I use my personal meeting ID for everything, and it's essentially the default for a lot of Zoom. That's why it happens with Eventbrite. That's why it defaults. So I always have a passcode here. You can always change it in meeting settings. Passcodes for webinars. This is embedding the passcode in the invite link. You've seen the one-click join on every calendar invitation. Basically, that just automatically embeds the password so that if I have the link, I don't need to then enter the password. It's just more convenient for your attendees. Again, anytime you see authenticated users, it just means that they have a Zoom account. It's a great way for Zoom to get new people to join if they don't, but it's also good if you are concerned about security and want to make sure that the person has a Zoom account and for all intents and purposes is part of this virtual professional sphere. More authentication options here. This is interesting. So block users in specific domains. This is extremely helpful if you have someone who has spammed you before, or in our case, I've had clients where they've actually had to ask someone to leave previous meetings. So you can actually just block their entire, at bethlawrence.co, you can block the entire thing. So that's great to know for security purposes. I skipped this. So phone only users, a lot of people don't like phone only users because you can't necessarily authenticate or tell who they are if you don't know their phone number, or if they don't change their, if they don't have the ability to change their name. If you don't enable the waiting room, it's just going to say, okay, are they going to be blocked or are you going to allow them? Because it's one or the other. They can either join by phone or they're not allowed to join the meeting at all. Let's see. So then you can also do block entry for users from specific countries. I've never done that, but I'm sure that there are reasons to do it, or Zoom would not have it. So here's the overall settings for when you're scheduling a meeting. This automatically, if you toggle this, your video as the host will always be on. I don't love that because sometimes I have set it to automatically record and I'm making a weird face and I don't necessarily want the recording to start yet. So I don't like to toggle that on. Obviously do what you would like. And again, in the individual meetings, you can change these settings. This is just sort of a catch-all. So they're saying, by default, these are the settings. Excuse me. You can also do the same thing with participants video. The different audio types, I always allow folks to join by telephone and computer because it's accessible and you don't know what people have access to. I always use Zoom on my computer. Most people that I know use it on their phone. So I always want to make sure that it's easy for people. I don't know why you would want participants to join before you unless you are a host who has meetings with your team and you're chronically late, but that would make me panic to have my participants be able to join before I'm prepared. So that's the different setting that you can do.
Do they just sit in the waiting room though?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So then that's where customizing the waiting room comes in.
Yep.
Yeah. So again, you can disable your meeting ID. This watermark thing is really cool. So essentially, if I had this toggled on and I was sharing my screen, you would see your email address as a watermark across my presentation, so that even if someone screenshots it, for example, they're not going to be able to claim it as their own. So I thought that was really cool. It requires other enabling, but again, you have to decide what's best for your events. I always like to mute all participants when they join. You will inevitably have to say you're on mute, but it's much better than if you've been in a meeting and someone dials in from their car on the expressway and there's a semi truck going past them and you have this calm meeting that's just disrupted by this noise. So I always like muting participants when they join. A good quick tip is, if you do this, and I have to remember to do this, is customize in your waiting room settings, like note that you will be muted upon entry. That way people know and they're prepared for it, even though people don't read all the time. So there is a Zoom desktop client that a lot of folks use, and then you can receive the desktop notifications if you want. I'm weird with notifications, so I have that off. Excuse me. I also have everything on my calendar, so I don't need it. Pardon me. This is really cool. So any third-party endpoints, so Eventbrite or any of the survey affiliates that you link, you can require that their data is encrypted, so that you don't know what's passing between what. It also requires another setting, but again, that's getting more into like security issues. If you're like me and you don't necessarily have a lot of huge meetings with security issues, you don't need to worry about that. This is really neat. You can actually disable the chat. Sometimes in meetings, disabling the chat is actually great, because then people can actually focus on what's going on. Sometimes you want people to be able to chat with everyone. And here, again, you can change this in your settings while you're in the meeting, but there's a default. Do you want people to be able to talk to everyone, or do you want people to be able to focus on what's going on, or just able to talk to the host and co-host and say like, hey, you're going too fast. Hey, I'm having this problem, whatever it is. You can also toggle off and on private chat. You'll notice that in some meetings that you go into, you can have conversations with the other attendees, and in some meetings you can't. That's why. A lot of people, especially if you're doing educational things, don't like to have the private chat because it can be distracting. So just think about your different meetings and your overarching uses of Zoom when you're in this section, and what you think the default should be. There's a lot of options in here for saving chats. I don't like the notification when someone joins or leaves, but if you prefer it, especially if you don't have a waiting room, I absolutely recommend you playing a notification when someone joins or leaves, because if you don't have a waiting room and you don't have a notification, you have no idea when someone joins, especially if you are hiding non-video participants and they don't have their video on. So again, all these little decisions intersect to make or break your experience. But the good news is Zoom gives you a lot of options to change it, not only beforehand, but on the fly. So sending files via meeting chat. Some people don't want folks to send files because you can't necessarily do the same like security checks, I guess, through Zoom as you can through your own computer. It's only available with certain versions, and you can also say, okay, you're only allowed to send PowerPoint through, you're only allowed to send JPEG or what have you. You can also set a maximum file size so people aren't bogging down your meeting and your bandwidth with sending huge files. You can always, follow up afterwards with folks. Again, this is a meeting chat versus webinar chat. Zoom treats it as two completely different things. So just note that you can have settings be different. So in like webinar chat, I don't necessarily need people to be able to send big files. Meetings are more collaborative. At least that's where my mind goes. Always, I like to have feedback, give feedback to Zoom. I use it a lot. I would like them to know my experience so they can change it for the better. This is something really neat that I had kind of just discovered, that you can display an end of meeting experience survey, which is just a thumbs up, thumbs down. You've probably seen it, like, how was your experience? Thumbs up or thumbs down. You can also just do it randomly. I like to do it for every meeting because it, again, keeps track data. You can actually disable the ability to have co-hosts if you would like to. Co-hosts are a fail-safe for me, so I always like to have a co-host if I can. So here you can say, okay, they can add the polls before or during a meeting. A lot of times, if you start a meeting and you haven't done your poll, it stinks, and if you can't troubleshoot, I always like to be able to troubleshoot on site. So that's why I allow the advanced and then also allow the alternative host, because again, backup plans after backup plans. You can present a meeting survey once the meeting has ended. Those settings are in your individual meeting settings as far as the actual questions on the survey, but this allows you to even have that option. Again, same thing for meetings, polls and quizzes, surveys. I just toggled this on and I could not be happier. Show the meeting control bar. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but sharing your screen on Zoom, if the control bar disappears, it can be extremely annoying to try to get it back. So I have it toggled on so that I always show my meeting control bar. I tried to show my Zoom window during the screen share, meaning kind of show you what I'm seeing. It didn't necessarily work that way, at least in the test that I did. But from the research that I did online, you should be able to show your own Zoom window during your screen share. This is something that I feel like I just need more testing on, but that could be really great as far as, showing people what you see and tutorials and troubleshooting and things like that. So again, more screen sharing options. A lot of these you can do while you're in the meeting. Disable desktop screen sharing, and then disable screen sharing when guests are in the meeting. Again, guests meaning not signed in or not in the same account, so they're not authenticated. That just is security for you, essentially. So annotation tools, you can toggle them on and off. Whiteboards, remote control is really neat. If you need to control the other person's content, that means that I can help even advance like the slide control, so that if for some reason, the speaker is having an issue with advancing the slides, they can have someone else advance it for them, which is a really great thing to assign your co-host or your technical support to do. This nonverbal feedback is what you're probably seeing next to the reactions. So that is, again, the coffee cup, meaning you're taking a break, speed up, slow down, yes, no. It just gives feedback where people don't have to unmute or raise their hand. And then this is where you can toggle for the meeting reactions, whether you want all emojis or selected emojis. Again, it's just your preference. I like to have as much fun with Zoom as I can, so why not have all emojis? I guess the thought is, some could be not safe for work, so to speak. So use your own judgment. Reactions in webinars. So this is really neat. Allow remove participants to rejoin. I am going to toggle that on, and here's why. Removed participants. If I have let's take a step back. If I have a waiting room, I always have a gatekeeper between me and the person that's joining my meeting. So if I remove someone, it's usually because their name didn't match what it said in the waiting room, or it isn't the person that I thought it was. And in that case, then at least I'm able to kind of keep an eye on that. Or it's someone who is having issues with their connection or issues with their microphone or camera, and it's just freezing and causing a lot of noise or commotion for the rest of the event. So in that case, I just remove them, and I don't want them to not be able to rejoin in a lot of cases. So use your own judgment with this. Kind of see, I've only had to remove a few people, so I'm hoping that isn't something you're gonna have to run into. If you invite other users, like if someone invites, like if you invited someone during this talk, then I would be able, if I toggle this on, I would be able to see them in here, so that at least I know, okay, there's someone that's invited and they're not necessarily joined yet. There's people that might be coming. I always like to allow participants to rename themselves. So again, this is meeting participants. So that's people that are actually participating in a workshop style collaborative meeting, and webinar panelists. Attendees can't rename themselves in panels, in webinars, I'm sorry. For all intents and purposes, Zoom does not care about who the attendees are in webinars. They care about who is going to be on camera and who's going to be spotlit. So that's kind of the major difference that you'll see in all of these settings. this is a cool thing that you can allow the host or co-host to rename participants in the waiting room. Quite honestly, I would love to do that and probably will implement it for a lot of my programming, because if I know that, John comes in every week on his daughter's Zoom account and it says like Crystal loves Bobby, then I know, all right, I'm just going to change this to John's name and I don't have to ask him every week to change it, et cetera, or he doesn't have to change it. But again, I like to have my attendees be pretty free, and most of my meetings are pretty collaborative, so I don't have that on. This is great, hiding participant profile pictures. That means you only see their names. You won't see anybody's photos. This is good if you don't know all of your attendees and you don't know if they're going to have something that might be inappropriate as their profile picture. It's just always good, or just to standardize so that you only see the names and not their profile pictures, because it's a little bit easier to call them by their name. Any questions about the basic meeting settings? Okay. So here's some advanced settings. Again, reporting to Zoom. Always want to do that with software. This allows you or disallows you to have session branding. So you can set virtual backgrounds, name tags. You can apply it to all of the different people and stakeholders in your meeting. This toggles whether you want Q&A in your webinar. There is a chat feature in your webinar. It typically is separate from Q&A. If you want it to be the same, usually that would be because you didn't really have someone on the back end to manage the Q&A. Then, in my opinion, it's great to toggle the Q&A off. Unless the other good thing about Q&A is if I ask a question, if one of you asks a question and I don't want to answer it as the host, I don't have to answer it. And in the settings, I can make sure that the other participants don't see it. If you are having a discussion about something that can be extremely polarizing, it's actually a good thing to have that kind of backup, because in my experience, you can't really control what your attendees are going to say or do or how they're going to phrase their questioning. If you don't have a speaker that is able to reword their questions, relanguage their questions, then it's a really good idea to have that Q&A as opposed to someone just asking that question in front of the entire group within a chat setting. But I can help if anyone has individual questions as far as like, what settings should I use for this upcoming event that I'm doing? I have ways that we can have one-on-one meetings about that as well. So here again, breakout room settings. I always like the broadcasting of the messages. This is something that's really cool. You can actually view the status of your participants in their breakout room. So you can see, is someone sharing their screen? Is someone giving a reaction to something? That's great for me doing long-term programming, because sometimes you send people to the breakout rooms and you don't know what the heck's going on in there. So you can see like, hey, is the host sharing their screen? Are they getting some reactions, or, what's going on in the room? This just allows you to do it when scheduling or when not, or only in the meeting. When scheduling, I think is perfectly fine, though it's not difficult to do breakout rooms at last minute if you need. This is really neat. Again, you can provide one-on-one remote support to a participant. So that is really cool. You can kind of help them troubleshoot if something's going on. Manual captions, that means that someone can type closed captioning while you are while a host or a speaker is speaking, or you can get a third-party service. There are many third-party services that do it now. So that's great accessibility feature. Automated captions are available as well. I do see that, or I have been, I follow a lot of the folks in the disabled community, and they do say that for accessibility, sometimes the automatic captions are not the greatest, especially for someone who talks fast like me. Even Instagram's captions don't necessarily work. So if you are concerned that any of your attendees will need accessibility or different ways to access your content, I would definitely make sure that you spend some time in these settings and see what works best for you. I do have it set that you can view a viewing of the full transcript in the side panel. That is for people who may learn better visually or need to read something after being taught. You can also see allow participants to save the captions, do language interpretation. You can actually allow another user to take control of your camera. So that's really neat. If you have, for example, like TV cameras or cameras that you can move, it's really cool to be able to take control of the cameras. That's usually probably for those like multi-camera type webinar experiences. Group HD video just activates higher quality video for everyone. I don't recommend toggling this on unless you know that everyone has great bandwidth, because otherwise it can slow down your meeting, and that can be way more painful than having a little bit fuzzy of a video. Here's your virtual backgrounds. You can customize it here. You can do videos. You can manage them here. Again, I'm not a virtual background kind of gal, but do what works for you. You can apply video filters, avatars. There is an immersive view, which is really neat. So you can create specific scenes or situations within your meeting. I've not had the pleasure of doing this yet, but it seems like Zoom is really stepping up their game, especially when it comes to educational components. This is a great way to, instead of doing all those individual settings as an attendee, if you hit focus mode, which actually should be an option today, it only shows those who are labeled hosts and co-hosts videos and profile pictures. That's great for kind of taking out the noise, right? If you have 50 participants in a meeting and everyone's, people are going off camera and on camera and everyone's popping off and on, you hit focus mode, it's just going to focus on the people that matter. There's options to, again, always worrying about security, options to identify guest participants in the meetings and webinars. You can also allow users to add someone to an auto answer group. So essentially, if any members of that group call, then they'll be automatically answered. I don't really know what this is. I will tell you, I don't really know what this is for. I have to do a little bit more research on it, but I'm sure that there is a wonderful application to it. And I'd be happy to answer individual questions if you need to, after I do some research. Just get in touch with me. And then this is all settings mostly for email invitations, plugins. This is really, really neat if you are someone that likes music. So if you joined and you noticed that there was some music, some lo-fi music playing in the beginning, I actually had stereo audio on, which is optimal for live performances. So during the pandemic, there were so many DJs that were giving amazing live performances on Zoom. And frankly, a lot of them didn't know how to share their sound properly. You probably know that if you share your screen, there's a small button to share your sound and optimize for video clip. But this stereo option is really neat, because that way the attendees can receive the music the way that it's meant to be, and the person that is playing the music can make sure that it's coming through much clearer than just in a traditional sense. Join from your browser, you've all seen that. And then this is where you can customize the live streaming options, meetings versus webinars. This is a cool setting. If you do a webinar, when the webinar has reached capacity, you can remind them to watch the live stream. Again, I have not actually done this through Zoom, but I think that that's a really amazing feature. So if your webinar has 500 attendees maximum and you have 505 that want to join, the 5 that join last will then have a reminder to say, hey, go over to Facebook, go over to our YouTube, go over to our Twitch and watch it. If you can't join it, join the webinar. You can also create a custom disclaimer. I think I have that disabled on the overall settings. That's why it won't let me do it. If you want people to ask permission to unmute, you can do that. Again, you have to think about your own meeting settings. I like to have attendees be able to be pretty free, but this is an option for you if you like to have a little bit more control about the experience, especially if you are recording and don't want people to be able to just randomly unmute themselves. Let's see. So this is stopping incoming video. It basically just means that on my end, I won't see any video coming in. I won't see anyone turning on their cameras other than who is already. And then this is really cool. You can save a gallery view. So you've all seen the gallery where there's, 9 people like the Brady Bunch. So you can actually reorder the pictures in the gallery, and you can save it as a seating chart, unique to the meeting ID. So if you have a recurring meeting with your team every week and you want everyone to let's say, give their spiel or their updates in the same order, you can actually save them as a gallery view. So the CEO gives their update first, the CMO gives their update second, COO gives the update third, and it's automatically saved that way so that when everyone logs in each week, you'll be going in the same order. These are all the email notification settings. This is basically just my email notification settings. So I won't go through this. This is a good thing to toggle on though. If you do have a cloud recording, and you want to make sure that some people have access to it for a certain amount of time, toggle that on, and then you'll get a notification to say, hey, this is going to be deleted in 7 days. If you want to extend it, then, you have to delete some other things or buy more storage, etc. The other settings I'm not super familiar with. Obviously there's integration here. This is kind of neat that there's other people in the organization that can schedule meetings on your behalf. That's nice if you have an assistant. And then you can also check your preview emails and do many different things here. So that is the overall settings of Zoom. There's a lot of different things. Not going to go into all the recording settings because it's a lot today, but you can definitely go through here and make sure that all the settings are how they should be. So again, do you want to save the chat? Do you want to save, do you want your participants to be able to record? If you don't, then you can toggle this off. Same thing with cloud recording settings. The one thing that I will point out with the recordings is this. So I always recommend recording all different views of the recording. What this means is if they record active speaker with shared screen, it's recording me and my shared screen only, right? If they record gallery view with shared screen, it means it's recording all of you plus me plus my shared screen. This means that we're getting all of them separately. And then you can also get the audio file, one audio file for all participants. You can do separate audio files for each participant, which is great if you want to isolate someone's experience each week. And then maybe either this is great for podcasts, or it's just great if you want to isolate audio between one person versus a collective, which could have a lot of background noise. I have not tested the separate audio file, so I would definitely do a test recording to make sure before you record your last ditch effort at a podcast. So again, here's some cloud recording settings. You can add a timestamp. You can decide whether you want to display people's names. Some people might want to remain anonymous. If you want the thumbnails, you can. Here's some settings as far as the third-party video editors, saving panelist chats, poll results, and then you can save the closed captioning as well. That's always good, obviously, for accessibility. Cloud recording sharing. You can also have all of your meetings automatically record. I don't necessarily think you need to do this, but if you want to have everything recorded, make sure you have a lot of storage and then just toggle that on. Cloud recording access. This allows you to say, okay, this specific IP address is the only people that can access the cloud recording. Good for internal meetings, security purposes, etc. More authentication, settings as far as what people can see the chat, when to delete the cloud recordings. This is really important. If you want to keep them, make sure that you have this toggled off. Excuse me. And then the voice prompt that just lets people know that you're recording the meeting. So I actually am going to change that right now. And then you'll see the phone users as different recording notification settings that you can do for them. There's a lot more that you can do with Zoom. Obviously, you can see that's just sort of the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. But is there anything else as far as what I showed you that you want me to go through a little bit more?
No, this is awesome. This was really helpful.
Good. I'm so glad. So I'm going to share one last thing. Let's see. I'm going to share one last way that you can get in touch with me. So for the month of June, I was gonna say the month of Zoom. For the month of Zoom, I am giving 25% off my Catalyst calls. So that's a one-on-one ask me anything format. Really, you can use it at any stage of your event planning, whether you have just an idea, whether you need suggestions for speakers, whether you need to pick the Zoom, the platform that you're going to be using, the ticketing platform, whatever you need, that's what that is for. We also have DIY workbooks on my website. And then I'm launching a course later this summer called How to Plan an Effective Virtual Event in 3 months. And I can send you, and I will send you the links for more information after this. So with that, that is the end. I am going to, let's see, stop